What kind of person tears apart a child's artwork in front of their face? The question hung in the air like a storm cloud over the Willow Creek Community Center, where the walls were usually alive with color and hope. Today, they bore witness to something darker. Karen stood in the middle of the art room, her heavy frame casting a shadow over a crumpled painting on the floor. The rainbow strokes, once vibrant, were now shredded, their colors bleeding into the linoleum. Her voice, sharp and unyielding, cut through the stunned silence. "This garbage doesn't belong here," she declared, her lips curling into a sneer. The room felt smaller, the air thicker, as if her words had sucked the oxygen out. Eli, barely 16, stood frozen, his thin fingers clutching the edge of his sketchbook. His dark eyes, usually bright with ideas, were wide with disbelief. The painting wasn't just paper and paint, it was his lifeline, a fragile thread woven through months of darkness. Depression had nearly swallowed him whole last year, a quiet battle no one in this small town had noticed until his art teacher, Miss Clara, saw the pain in his sketches. She'd given him a safe space, a canvas, and a reason to keep going. That rainbow painting, with its messy, hopeful arcs, was his first step out of the abyss. Now it lay in pieces at Karen's feet. Karen wasn't a stranger to Willow Creek. She was the kind of woman who thrived on control, her complaints a constant hum at every community meeting. The art program, funded by a local grant, had been her latest target. She'd stormed into the center that morning, claiming the kids' artwork was cluttering the space needed for her book club's display. No one expected her to take it this far. Miss Clara, a soft-spoken woman with gray streaks in her hair, stepped forward, her voice steady but trembling with restrained anger. "Karen, that was uncalled for. You had no right." Karen's eyes narrowed, her chin lifting defiantly. "I'm saving this place from looking like a daycare," she snapped, kicking the torn canvas aside. Eli flinched as if she'd struck him. The confrontation wasn't just about a painting. It was about power, about Karen's need to dominate every space she entered. She'd always been this way, loud, entitled, quick to dismiss anything that didn't serve her. Last month, she'd gotten the community garden's funding cut because she didn't like the weeds in the flower beds. The month before, she demanded the library remove books she deemed inappropriate. Most people rolled their eyes and moved on, but Eli wasn't most people. He was a kid who'd poured his soul into that painting, and Karen had ripped it apart without a second thought. Miss Clara knelt beside Eli, her hand gentle on his shoulder. "We'll fix this," she whispered, though her eyes betrayed her uncertainty. Karen scoffed, folding her arms. "Fix it? This trash. You're wasting everyone's time." Her words were a blade, and Eli's shoulders slumped further, his sketchbook slipping to the floor. The room felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for someone to break the tension. That's when Mia, a quiet girl who'd been painting in the corner, spoke up. Her voice was small but firm. That painting was for the charity auction. It was going to raise money for the mental health clinic. The words hit like a stone dropped in still water. Karen's smirk faltered, just for a second, but she doubled down. Charity? For what? These kids need discipline, not coddling. Mia's revelation was the first crack in Karen's armor. The charity auction was no small thing. It was Willow Creek's biggest fundraiser, supporting the tiny mental health clinic that had saved kids like Eli. The painting wasn't just art. It was a symbol of survival, a beacon for others struggling in silence. Karen didn't know that, and she didn't care to ask. Her ignorance only fueled her arrogance. But Mia's words had planted a seed of doubt in the room. People were starting to whisper, their eyes shifting from Karen to Eli. The boy's silence was louder than any argument, his pain a mirror reflecting Karen's cruelty. The tension in the room was a live wire, sparking with every word. Miss Clara stood, her voice rising now. "You don't get to decide what matters here, Karen. This is a community, not your personal kingdom." Karen's face reddened, her hands balling into fists. She wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone like Miss Clara, who'd spent years quietly building up kids like Eli. The standoff was electric, each side waiting for the other to break. Eli, still silent, picked up a piece of his torn painting, his fingers trembling as he traced the jagged edge of a rainbow. Something in his expression shifted, not defeat, but determination. He wasn't going to let Karen win. Not this time. The community center's art room was no longer just a room, it was a battlefield. Karen's sneer lingered, but the air had shifted. Eli's quiet resolve was a spark, and Miss Clara fanned it into a flame. She turned to Karen, her voice cutting through the haze. You think this is about clutter? That painting was Eli's therapy. His way of telling the world he's still here. You tore that apart. Karen opened her mouth, ready to fire back, but Miss Clara didn't give her the chance. You don't know what these kids go through. You don't know what that painting meant. The room was silent except for the faint creak of the old wooden floor under Karen's shifting weight. For the first time, she looked unsteady, her usual bravado cracking under the weight of eyes now fixed on her. Eli's voice, soft but piercing, broke the silence. It wasn't just mine, he said, clutching the torn piece of his rainbow painting. It was for Jamie. The name hung in the air, unfamiliar to Karen but heavy with meaning to everyone else. Jamie was Eli's younger cousin, a 12-year-old who'd been battling depression so severe she'd stopped speaking for weeks. Eli had painted the rainbow for her, a silent promise that color could return to her world. When Jamie saw it, she'd smiled for the first time in months. That painting was going to be auctioned to fund therapy sessions for kids like her. Karen's face twitched, her ignorance exposed, but she wasn't ready to back down. You're making this dramatic, she said, her voice thinner now. It's just a painting. The twist came like a gust of wind through an open window. Mia, who'd been quietly watching, stepped forward with her phone. It's not just a painting, she said, her voice shaking but resolute. She held up the screen, showing a photo of Jamie at the clinic, holding a smaller version of Eli's rainbow painting, her eyes bright with hope. The image was raw, unfiltered, a snapshot of a girl clinging to a lifeline. This was posted on the clinic's fundraiser page, Mia said. Eli's art raised enough to get Jamie 3 months of therapy. It's still helping her. The room gasped, the weight of the truth sinking in. Karen's hands dropped to her sides, her face paling as the reality hit her. She hadn't just torn up a piece of paper, she destroyed a symbol of hope, a kid's fight to survive. Karen tried to recover, her voice rising in defense. How was I supposed to know? This place is a mess. I'm trying to help. But her words sounded hollow, even to her. Miss Clara didn't let up. You didn't ask, Karen. You never ask. You just assume you're right. The teacher's words were a mirror, forcing Karen to see herself, her entitlement, her recklessness. The other parents and volunteers in the room, who'd been silent until now, started murmuring. One stepped forward, a man named Tom who ran the auction committee. That painting was projected to raise $500, he said, his voice low but firm. That's 10 therapy sessions for kids who can't afford it. You owe Eli an apology. Karen's eyes darted around, searching for an escape, but the room was closing in. Eli stood taller now, his sketchbook back in his hands, his gaze steady. I don't want your apology, he said, his voice clear despite the tremor. I want you to fix this. The challenge was unmistakable. A quiet kid standing up to a bully who'd underestimated him. Karen laughed, a nervous, brittle sound. Fix it? It's paper. It's done. But Eli wasn't done. He knelt, gathering the torn pieces, his fingers moving with purpose. It's not just paper, he said. It's me. It's Jamie. It's all of us. The standoff reached its peak as Miss Clara pulled out her phone, her hands shaking with purpose. I'm calling the center's board, she said. This wasn't just vandalism, Karen. You destroyed property meant for a nonprofit's fundraiser. There are consequences. Karen's face froze, her bravado crumbling as the word consequences sank in. She'd always skated by, her complaints dismissed as annoying but harmless. This was different. The board took the auction seriously, and vandalism carried legal weight. Karen stammered, You're blowing this out of proportion. But the room wasn't listening. They were with Eli, with Jamie, with the kids who needed that clinic. The murmur of the crowd grew louder, a chorus of disapproval. Karen's control was slipping, her authority unraveling with every accusing glance. She took a step back, her heel catching on a piece of the torn painting, and for a moment, she looked small, exposed. Eli didn't flinch. He held up the largest piece of his rainbow, the colors still vibrant despite the tears. "I'll make another one," he said, his voice steady now. "But you don't get to decide what matters anymore." The room erupted in quiet agreement, a tide turning against Karen's rain of complaints. She was no longer the loudest voice in the room, she was the one who'd gone too far. Karen's world was crumbling, and she could feel it. The community center, once her stage for complaints and control, was now a courtroom of judgment. The board arrived within the hour, two women in business casual who listened as Ms. Clara recounted the incident with calm precision. Karen tried to interrupt, her voice shrill. "This is ridiculous. It was just a kid's drawing." But the board wasn't swayed. They saw the torn painting, the photo of Jamie on Mia's phone, and Eli's quiet strength as he stood by his work. The evidence was undeniable. This was deliberate destruction of property meant for a charitable cause. One board member said, her tone clipped, "There will be an investigation, and you'll be liable for damages." Karen's face went white, her hands trembling as she realized the legal weight of her actions. Vandalism wasn't just a word, it could mean fines, community service, or worse, a mark on her pristine reputation. She'd always seen herself as the town's unofficial enforcer, but now she was the one on trial. The crowd didn't need to shout. Their silence was louder, their eyes a collective verdict. Karen tried one last defense, her voice cracking. "I didn't know what it was for. You can't blame me for that." But the board wasn't interested in excuses. They asked Eli to step forward, and he did, holding the pieces of his painting like a shield. "What do you want to happen, Eli?" one of them asked. He didn't hesitate. "I want the clinic to get the money, and I want her to help make it right." His words were simple but heavy, a demand for justice that didn't seek revenge. Karen's shoulders slumped, her defiance draining away. The board nodded, and within minutes, they drafted a plan. Karen would pay for the damages and volunteer at the auction to make up for the loss. If she refused, they'd escalate the matter to the local authorities. Karen nodded, her face a mask of resentment, but she had no choice. The room felt lighter, as if a storm had passed. Eli didn't stop there. He spent the next week in the art room, recreating the rainbow painting with Mia and Miss Clara by his side. The new canvas was bigger, bolder, with colors that seemed to glow under the community center's lights. Word of the incident spread, and the auction became a rallying point. People didn't just bid on Eli's painting, they shared stories of their own struggles, their own battles with darkness. The painting sold for triple its projected value, raising enough for 20 therapy sessions at the clinic. Jamie, who'd come to the auction with her parents, hugged Eli so tightly he could barely breathe. Her smile was brighter than the rainbow on the canvas. Karen was there, too, relegated to handing out programs at the auction's entrance. She didn't speak, didn't complain, but her eyes followed Eli's painting as it was carried to the stage. For the first time, she saw what she tried to destroy. Not just art, but hope, resilience, a community that refused to let her define it. She'd lost her grip on Willow Creek, and the town was better for it. The kids in the art program, inspired by Eli's courage, filled the walls with new paintings, each one a defiance of anyone who'd try to tear them down. Eli stood on the stage after the auction, his voice soft but clear. "This isn't about me," he said, holding up a small sketch of a rainbow he'd made for Jamie. "It's about all of us. We're stronger than we think." The crowd erupted in applause, not just for him, but for every kid who'd ever felt invisible, every person who'd fought to be seen. Miss Clara wiped tears from her eyes, and even Mia, usually so quiet, cheered. The community center wasn't just a building, Anna Maria, it was a promise. A place where art could heal, where kids like Eli and Jamie could find their way back to the light. Karen faded into the background, her influence reduced to a cautionary tale. The town didn't need her permission to thrive. Eli's new painting hung in the community center, a reminder that even torn things could be remade, stronger and more beautiful than before. The rainbow wasn't just colors on a canvas, it was a story of survival, a beacon for anyone who'd ever felt broken. And in Willow Creek, that story would live on, long after Karen's name was forgotten.